My name is Konstantin, and I'm going to talk about, what Johannes already mentioned, spectral reach, understanding scaling as progress into the spectral tail. And we've just recently had this at ICML, and this was joint work between Jonas Scheunemann, Sven Krippendorf, Samuel Tovey, my PI, Christian Holm, and me. And it was a collaboration between University of Stuttgart and Cambridge. And what this is essentially going to be about is, why do larger models perform better? And that's not going to work. So now it's going to work. And this is summarized by the term neural scaling laws, right? And they essentially say that if you use a larger neural network and train it on more data, you're going to get a better performance or reduce the loss. And you can see this here in the figure. You take more parameters, and this even seems to be predictable, which means you can check this scaling behavior on a smaller level and extrapolate it to larger scale to answer questions like, which model are we, or which model do we want to train? And this is kind of at the heart of how large language how LLMs are developed at the moment. But the thing we don't know, or we don't really have an understanding yet, is why do scaling laws come about and why do they hold so cleanly? And that's what this talk and my research is essentially going to be about. So let's directly jump into what we found. On the top right, maybe I can also hover with my mouse, yes. So on the top right, you can see what I just described. Here we have models of different sizes, and we train on the simple stories text data set. These are Llama 2 models. And what you can see is that the larger the model, the further down you reach in loss, so the better the model performance gets. And you can even fit a power law curve to this, which then tells you how this performance falls. Now, what we've added to this is we came up with a new empirical measure we call spectral position. And spectral position tells you how dominant or subtle is the learning signal at the current moment. And here you can see spectral position evaluated on exactly these runs. And what you can see is that the larger the model, the further down it reaches into the subtle signals, which means from what we see, it seems like that scaling might come from the fact that larger models can just train on more subtle and tiny signals, which smaller models can't reach. That's what we call spectral reach. And the rest of the talk is essentially going to be about what this measure essentially is and what we can learn from it. So what is this thing I just showed you? For that, we take a look at what the model can represent. And for this, we turn to the matrix of token-wise gradient similarities. Okay, quite complicated, but the idea is that you have the neural network, which we call F here. You get the token, you get the prediction for token I, and then you compute the gradient of it. And then you compare the scalar, you compute the scalar product for the gradient of token I with gradient of token J, which essentially tells you how similar are the gradients, okay? And if you then diagonalize this, you get eigenvectors and eigenvalues. And, well, let me check something. And these eigenvectors, they tell you about which structure, like they summarize patterns of structure that token gradients have in common. And the eigenvalue tells you how large is this signal, right? Like how large is this pattern? Is it dominant or is it subtle? Which means a large eigenvalue means you have a strongly expressed direction in in gradient space. And this corresponds to something like a dominant signal the model can express. And a small eigenvalue then is a very subtle signal the model can express. So if you would just plot all the eigenvalues and sort them, you get the spectrum. And on the left side of the spectrum, we have the large eigenvalues, which form the spectral bulk. And on the right, we have the spectral tail with the subtle signals. Does that make sense? Okay. So here I'm just showing a very simple example for a two-dimensional case, but in reality, we have like millions of eigenvalues if we train a neural network. Okay, why am I showing you this? Like, how does this relate to scaling? So the idea is, what we've done in our work is we've looked at what brings down the loss. And for that, we've turned to, we've analyzed, we analyzed the loss reduction in every single step. And if you do the math and take a closer look at this, you can find exactly this theta matrix I just described as a quadratic form of it, determining the first order of the loss reduction. And if you go into eigenspace, you see that the loss is going to be reduced by exactly this spectrum, but weighted with another spectral distribution that tells you how much the loss or like your current error signal aligns with each of these spectral modes or patterns. And this essentially tells you that loss is being reduced by two distributions, which is the spectrum of gradient patterns the model can identify and how much they are going to be used in training. And here's just a very simple sketch. So we have the spectrum again. We have the dominant pattern sitting on the left here with large eigenvalues and the subtle ones on the right. And what now brings down the loss is the overlap between these two spectra. So if we, for example, have a neural network that would only make use of the middle part of the spectrum, the usage curve would look something like this. And now what we did in our work is we extracted exactly this signal by defining what we call spectral position. And we did this, so we took this equation and then we removed all scales from this equation by normalizing it in a certain way. And by doing that, we obtain a bounded measure between 0 and 1 that tells you where in the spectrum learning is currently taking place. So you have this usage, like spectral position can only be 1 if this usage distribution sits on the largest possible eigenvalues, which means your neural network is only learning on very dominant signal patterns. And this can only be 0 if it's on the other end. So this usage distribution sits on the far right here in the subtle signal patterns. And with this in mind, we can, read the results again. I already showed you. So again, blue, small model, purple, large model. And what you can see is that all the models kind of start at a similar spectral position, which means what they learn initially seems to be of similar magnitude in terms of dominant or subtle pattern. And all of them then start to decrease, which means, like converted to the picture I was trying to draw before, this usage distribution now just shifts to the right. So here they train on the dominant signals, and over the course of training, they move to the right in this in the spectrum of patterns. And what you can also see is what we call now spectral reach, is that the larger the model, the further this usage distribution can reach into the tail of the spectrum. So larger models apparently can learn on more subtle signals. Okay. We've also asked, like, okay, is this maybe something that's just particular in language modeling or not? So we've tried this on computer vision examples. And here we can see essentially the same thing. We even compare on the left here in these plots, we compare standard parameterization. And on the right, we did this for maximal update parameterization, μp. And this is just vision transformers trained on Cypher5M image classification. And you can see the same pattern appearing. Like models start from larger spectral positions, so dominant signals go into the subtle ones. And the larger the model, the further they reach down into the subtle signals. Okay, now let me very quickly comment on why we can actually do this. Because usually empirical neural network analysis fails because you can't afford it. And so if you would just naively do what I described you, the problem you had is if you just take the language task I showed you results for, you need to materialize the token-wise Jacobians of the neural network output. And this, in the language setting, would require more than 60 million backward passes for a single value of spectral position. So there's just no way you're going to do this. Our way out, what we show in the paper, is that we derive an equivalent form, so an exact alternative form of how to compute spectral position. And this is based only on magnitudes. And with this and a bunch of other tricks we apply, we bring down the compute cost to less than twice computer memory of what it would require to make the training without computing spectral position. It only requires less than twice of computer memory to do the training and additionally track spectral position. So less than 100% overhead, you could say, which is still something you will feel. So it's not for free. But at least it's scalable and it's tractable, which is a nice first step, I would say. And just recently, it's not published, but we've also managed to compute spectral position for a 7B model on a single GPU. So that also works. I mean, as I said, it's scalable. All right, now what can we learn from all of this? So the picture I was trying to draw here is something you could call a spectral lens on optimization. Like we've seen that apparently, if you want a model to reach lower loss, it seems to be accompanied by the model reaching further down into the spectral tail. And this also tells you that apparently the signal and the patterns that the model has not resolved yet seem to sit in that unresolved tail. So we could, instead of asking the question, how can we bring down the loss even further, we could ask, how can we resolve the unresolved modes in the spectral tail? And this has two distinct solutions to it. First, we could try to accelerate the descent into the tail, which is probably what a good optimizer does. Or we could try to reshape the spectrum itself. So pull in the eigenvalues that sit far out in the spectral tail and move them into the bulk such that the tail mass just becomes smaller and it's easier for the model to reach further down, which is probably what a good architecture or data representation buys you. So with all of that, what I'm trying to say here in the outlook is maybe we can use this picture to explain recent advances that we've seen in the field in terms of just very simple moves in this spectral picture. Okay, and with that, I'm already at the end. So if you're interested or want to know more, just feel free to reach out to me or give the paper a read. And if you also just want to try it out yourself on your own data or model parameters, we have two code bases that allow for that in a actually very simple way. And with that, I'm very happy to take on a few questions if you have any.